Early morning of February 24, 2022, explosions erupted across Ukraine. Russia launched missiles and airstrikes against military, civilian infrastructure and peaceful Ukrainian cities.
Russia has struck our military infrastructure and our border units. There have been explosions in many Ukrainian cities. I have decided to conduct a special military operation.
The Russian army entered the territory of Ukraine not only from Russia, but also from Belarus. Already in the first hours of war, civilian casualties are reported in Kharkiv region and Uman. The command of the Russian cruiser Moskva demands that the Ukrainian garrison on Zmyiny Island in the Black Sea lay down their arms and surrender. The response of the Marines become a symbol of Ukrainian resistance.
Russian warship, go!
The Ukrainian armed forces are stopping the Russian army on the outskirts of the capital. Bucha, Hostomel, Irpin, parts of Kharkiv, Zaporizhia and Kherson region are under occupation. Russian troops are systematically destroying Mariupol. Tens of thousands of peaceful people are stuck in a death trap.
We have no electricity, we have nothing to eat, no medicine, nothing.
On March 9, 2022, Russian occupation troops struck a maternity hospital in Mariupol, and on March 16, they hit the Mariupol Drama Theater, where several hundred people are hiding from the shelling. It is still unknown how many people were killed back then. The total number of people killed in Mariupol also remains undisclosed. People are buried in squares, yards, and simply in trenches.
I want to go home, I want to go to work.
After the Ukrainian Defense Forces liberated the Kyiv region, the whole world saw the atrocities of the Russian occupiers in Bucha, Hostomel and Irpin. The bodies of murdered civilians were found everywhere, on the pavement, in country yards, basements of private houses and on the roads. Some victims had their hands tied behind their backs. Their bodies bore traces of torture. The invaders mercilessly destroyed even cars with the inscription "Children," on which residents tried to evacuate. Dozens of torture chambers and countless burials of victims of Russian occupiers were discovered in the liberated territories. Russia's crimes are recorded and documented by authoritative experts and journalists of the world's leading media. Then, for the first time in the world, the war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine was called the genocide of the Ukrainian people.
There's increasing evidence of direct attacks against civilians, as well as on energy and other infrastructure, torture, ill treatment, sexual violence, and summary executions are known to have been committed by Russian forces. Not even children are being spared. Russia must be held accountable for these horrific crimes, and Putin must be held accountable.
The mass killing of Ukrainian prisoners of war in July 29 in Olenivka colony of the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region is another Russian war crime.
It is likely that this terrorist attack was organized on purpose in order to cover up the traces of torture and, moreover, the murders of our prisoners.
On April 26, 2022, the first meeting of the contact group in Ramstein format took place. More than 40 defense ministers from all around the world gathered in the US airbase in Germany to discuss assistance to Ukraine. Since then, the Ukrainian army had been receiving Western military equipment, first ammunition and artillery, HIMARS, and eventually air defense systems and tanks. Soon, Ukraine is to receive F-16 aircrafts, and on June 23, 2023, Ukraine was granted candidate status for EU membership. Today
you have made one of the most important decisions for Ukraine in the 30 years of independence of our state. But this decision, I believe, is not only for Ukraine. It is the biggest step towards strengthening Europe that can be taken right now.
As early as September 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces had begun liberating occupied towns and villages in Kharkiv region. After the Ukrainian armed forces conducted a number of successful operations, the Russian army felt an acute shortage of manpower. Putin announced the so-called partial mobilization, which turned out to be indefinite. On October 8, 2022, the security service of Ukraine dealt the Russian dictator the most painful reputational blow. An explosion on the Crimean bridge collapsed 2 sections of the road and damaged a railway track. Attacks on the Crimean bridge would later become routine, but the Kremlin took the first one as a slap in the face. The Russians took it as a signal to leave the Russian-occupied peninsula.
I don't want to leave Crimea at all. I used to live here as if it were my home.
The liberation of Kherson, occupied by the Russian army, was another landmark event of the big war. On November 11, 2022, the armed forces of Ukraine entered the city.
I'm overwhelmed with emotions. I can't even believe it happened. God, I hope that's forever.
Autumn 2022, massive Russian missile attack on Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure. Ukraine has endured long blackouts but stood strong, and the Russian army has suffered the most massive losses in manpower and equipment, not comparable to both Chechen wars, the invasion of Afghanistan and other conflicts involving Moscow. The threat of an emergency at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, battles for Bakhmut, Ugledar, Mariinka and Avdiivka. This is what Ukraine was living with at the beginning of 2023, and on June 6, 2023, Russian terrorists destroyed the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. Dozens of settlements in the Kherson region went underwater. It is still not known exactly how many people died back then. The damage to the environment, according to experts, is irreparable. During 2 years of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the Kremlin has committed an unprecedented number of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Representatives of the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Violations in Ukraine have said,
"We have seen many different violations on the Russian side. Premeditated murder, killing of civilians, rape, deportation of children, sexual offenses in the occupied territories and other violations of the law." Eric Mose, chairman of the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine.
More than 100,000 such crimes of the Russian military have been recorded, and now the war is gradually taking over the border towns of the Russian Federation. Explosions in the deep Russian rear are sounding more and more often. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, thanks to the efforts of the Ukrainian security services and the army, has noticeably shrunk and no longer controls the situation in the region. And Putin no longer calls the goal of the war the denazification of the Ukraine and the 3-day blitzkrieg, but the defense of Russia and ensuring its preservation. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to fight. The goal is to regain the entire territory of an independent and free Ukraine, all 603,628 square kilometers. Reported by Anastasia Tarnavska, Natalia Husak, Volodymyr Штангелов, UATV News.